Welcome to another masterclass. This is Pastor Clifton Haynes of Center Hill Church of God in Christ. We're so glad you can join us tonight for another masterclass. We did one a few weeks ago on mental health, and tonight we're doing one on Black Businesses Matter. I believe that God has called us to an abundant life, both spiritually and naturally. It's important for us not only to access the spiritual things of God, but also use the wisdom and knowledge of God to subdue the world. And tonight we're talking about economic empowerment, and I have the distinct honor and privilege to talk to a family member, a cousin, a brother, who is not just somebody who is a novice to the economic future and well-being of our community, but somebody who actually lives it, and he's an entrepreneur himself. James Baldwin said, "The price one pays for pursuing any profession or calling is an intimate knowledge of the ugly side." And tonight, Anthony Young exposes some of the ugly sides of Black-owned businesses and the things that they face, the challenges they face. I hope tonight that you'll stay tuned and hear the whole thing. He is somebody who is doing great things in the city of Memphis. He's a capital executive there for a great organization. And so I thank God for him joining us tonight. He's going to expose some of the things that are going on, that I believe we can prosper in a pandemic. He's going to share some ways for us to prosper and some of the programs that are out there and available, but also letting us know some of the challenges that come with it. So I hope you brought your thinking caps, and I hope you are staying tuned and ready to be inspired, informed, and influenced by Anthony Young tonight. Let's go into the interview. Now, we're here with Anthony Young. He is a husband, an entrepreneur, community and economic developer. He has a background in banking and entrepreneur. I call him, he's a dream maker. So we're going to get started with our interview. Man, I'm so glad that you can join us today, kind of talk about some things that we're seeing as far as some impacts of the economic impacts of the pandemic, also social injustice. A lot of things are going on. And so we're grateful that you're here to join us with the masterclass, and thank you for joining us, first of all.
Hey, listen, Pat, you can't join in. You got to be born in. So, hey, look, I got my headset ready. To make sure all eyes can see and all ears can hear, man. So I'm ready.
Well, man, I'm glad you could join us. And so, for everybody, just background. Anthony, I call him Jawan, aka BA. Been knowing him all my life, so this is family. So we just kicking it. So everybody that's tuning in, we're grateful that you're tuning in. But this is just family kicking it. So if we forget the titles, all that other stuff, we're all good. Man, to start off, I just want to, what have you seen? How's the pandemic affected small businesses and entrepreneurship just in general? What are you seeing?
So I think it's impacted a couple of ways, maybe three definitive ways. One, it has really limited businesses' ability to kind of gauge what their revenue model is going to be. So if you're opening at 50%, 75% capacity, your overhead is still close to 100%, right? And so it's difficult to gauge your revenue model to see if it's a sustainable endeavor for you or not. So that's one. Two, we really don't know what the consumer behavior will be, right? So if we're talking about restaurants or things of that nature, at what point will the consumers completely feel comfortable going out to eat again? If we're talking about retail, at what point will we feel comfortable completely going to shop in a boutique again, right? So I think we've seen it from that regard. We've also seen it hit employment. Traditionally, small businesses are the leaders of employment in the country. And so we've seen a significant drop in unemployment in that regard. And then I think the silver lining is that we've seen a lot of businesses begin to pivot and shift their business models, right? So we've seen restaurants begin to offer curbside service that
Right.
they may now adopt as a permanent model. We've seen retailers now focus more on online sales and shipments and things of that nature, which may now become a permanent part. So I think we've seen tremendous amount of negative impact from the pandemic, but we've also seen some kind of reinvent themselves and kind of shift and pivot a bit.
Yeah. Well, how has it affected minority businesses in general? Is it more? Is it about the same? What are you seeing for minority businesses?
So it's definitely more for minority businesses, and I'll give you a few things there. There was a report that ran about 2 weeks ago that estimated that 95% of Black-owned firms will be shut out of access to PPP,
Wow.
and that 91% of Latino-owned companies will be shut out of PPP. So just with that, I want to say it's also important. Language is important.
Right.
So it's also important that when we are talking about minority-owned companies, that we say minority. But when we're talking about Black-owned companies, it's important that we use the term Black, right?
Right. Yeah.
The
Absolutely.
term minority is a comfort word, so it makes us feel comfortable. But using terms like minority, people of color, those terms lead to what I call economic leakage, right? When there are programs and dollars available, and we're intending to use those dollars for Black-owned firms, when we use terms like um, minority and people of color, we see that economic leakage. And so I want to delineate that for a bit. But in terms of the impact, there was also a report that showed that there was a drop, that 41% of Black-owned businesses shut down through April.
Wow.
So that comes down to a couple of things. One, it's access to capital.
Right.
In fact, if we were to go back in history, the entire idea of Black enterprise is it was never intended to work, right?
Right.
Black capitalism was not intended to be a thing. Why?
Right.
In order to have capitalism, you had to have capital, and we've been shut out of having access to capital. In fact, we were the capital, right? So we've been shut out of access to capital since we have been here. So the notion of Black entrepreneurship, Black enterprise, Black capitalism has always been an uphill battle.
Yeah.
So when things like a pandemic happens or a recession happens, it hits us harder. It hits us harder because the contracts that may be set aside for minority-owned firms, those contracts now go to majority firms, right? They fight harder to get those contracts.
Right.
In terms of access to capital, especially with the PPP, your banks are going to favor their favorite clients, their favorite customers, which may not be us. And so the ability to stay afloat during the recession was tough for us.
Right.
I would say, moreover, the estimate is that 95% of Black-owned businesses, or let me start with the 5. That 5% of Black-owned businesses have a W-2 employee beyond the owner, right? So it is incredibly challenging for us to get access to PPP and things of that nature. Moreover, when you think about the concept of micro enterprise, micro businesses. So micro business is a company that has 5 or less employees. They have less than $250,000 in revenue. That's a micro enterprise. A small business can be up to 500 employees. They can have up to $35 million in revenue, depending on what industry they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is very challenging for micro businesses to qualify for small business loans, right? When we mitigate risk from a lender's standpoint, collateral is typically one of the things that we use to assess that risk. And so if you are an e-commerce business and you rent the office that you operate out of, what collateral do you have? You don't have any, right?
Right.
A lot of our Black-owned firms are um, also micro businesses. They're micro enterprises, and so we get hit all around. Um, we get hit on a number of sides when pandemics and recessions happen.
Right. Right. Hey, quick question, just for our viewers out there that may be novice to some of the things that in the financial industry. What is define PPP for us? I keep hearing you use that term. Define it for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. So PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program.
Right. Okay.
It's a part of the CARES Act, which passed March 27th. And the notion was that um, companies could get access to 2.5 times their payroll, right? So if my payroll is $10,000 a month, um, I could, in a sense, go to a bank of choice, participate in the Paycheck Protection Program, and get $25,000, right? Because again, it's 2.5 times my monthly payroll. If I use, and they've since changed, but if I use 60% of the money for payroll, then the loan is forgivable. I do not have to pay that money back.
Right. Okay.
Which is a great way to assist companies. The challenge is when they wrote the law, they were very ambiguous with the relationship between. Well, they didn't give a great deal of information as to how banks were supposed to participate in the program. So a lot of your banks were confused, and some of them underwrote the deals before they even submitted it to SBA. And that put us at a disadvantage because, again, they chose to offer the program initially to their largest customers
Yeah.
and those who had quote unquote relationships with them. Well, relationship for us may mean I have a business checking account there. Relationship for the bank was that you had to have a credit relationship with them, meaning that you had to have a business loan, right?
Right.
Well, uh, Black folks ain't been able to get business loans for banks for a long time, right?
Right.
And so
Is that
now,
some of the huge franchises initially be some of the companies that got the most money initially because they had those relationships with the banks, and then the media got hold to it, and then they wanted to give the money back. Is that some of the things too?
yeah, I think that had something to do with it. I also think it had something to do with the fact that, again, there wasn't a great deal of transparency as to how the program was supposed to work.
Right.
So, yeah, a lot of banks put their biggest and their favorite customers ahead of us in line, but a lot of it had to do with just the ambiguity of the process. And so
Right.
they felt, at least some of the banks that I've talked to, they felt more comfortable with those that they already had relationships with.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. So my next question was, did you think the CARES Act did enough, especially for Black-owned businesses? For us, did the CARES Act do enough for us?
No, I think,
I could gather that from what you were saying.
yeah, I mean, I think that, I think representation is incredibly important.
Yeah.
I think representation is important in Congress and with our legislators. I think representation is important in our banking systems with those that are making decisions. And so, while it may have been well intended, the CARES Act did leave a lot of Black-owned businesses, the majority of Black-owned businesses, out to dry. And I don't know, what the residual effect of that is going to be.
Right.
They did not do enough to specifically allocate funds for Black-owned businesses. They
Yeah.
could have allocated more funds to Black chambers of commerce. They could have allocated more funds to minority groups that provide access to capital
Right.
to funds like that. And again, we're talking about Black-owned businesses right now, and I think that um, in today's climate, it should have been intentional to ensure that Black-owned businesses had all the information that they needed up front,
Mm-hmm.
that there was a pot of money set aside specifically for those Black-owned businesses that may not get access to PPP. Now, we saw a lot of national philanthropic foundations release some funds, but it's just not enough. So, in terms of the CARES Act, I do think more could have been done to ensure that both minority-owned businesses and Black-owned businesses got access to the capital that they needed.
Right, right. Hey, I read something that you wrote on your website for your company. Wonderful article, but something that stuck out to me was you said, and I quote, first there exists a justified distrust of the process on behalf of Black-owned business owners, kind of discussing the PPP and the CARES Act and just getting capital in general. Can you kind of elaborate on that article, number one, and then specifically that distrust that Black business owners and entrepreneurs have for the system?
Sure. So thank you for referencing that. The article is picked up in medium.com, and it's titled Black Businesses Matter. And as I was working with all of these small businesses, a lot of them were Black-owned businesses, I saw the disadvantage that we faced.
Right.
And the disadvantage was kind of what I explained earlier, is that we didn't even have an opportunity to apply at a lot of our banks, right? We've had our business checking account at this bank for years, and they won't even take our application, right? And so it really boils down to a couple things. Wells Fargo put out a poll a few years ago, and 60% of Black business owners felt that they would be turned down for a loan even before they applied, right?
Yeah.
That speaks to a couple things. If you look at historical data, Black folks are more than 2 times as likely to be turned down for a loan than majority-owned firms. So it speaks to the disenfranchisement. When programs are rolled out, we don't even think that they're for us, right?
Yeah.
Because we've been disenfranchised for so long. Take a look at the GI Bill and think about how basically the white middle class was built by the GI Bill, and we didn't have equal access to those funds, right? So the New Deal and all those things, we didn't have equal access to those programs, right? So that disenfranchisement permeates through generations, and we just don't feel like those things are for us. The
Right.
second sense, this is what I think we're just talking about in terms of distrust. You're talking about a partnership, in a sense, between the government and banks. And so, the government or the banks haven't been, I don't know if we can point to a time in which they've ever had the well-being of Black folks top of mind, right? Those two institutions. And so we can even go back to the Freedmen's Bank, right? Which is the first Black bank that was created after slavery, right? They convinced us that we should buy the land that we were rightfully owed. They convinced us to save all our money post-slavery into the Freedmen's Bank. And they took our money and they invested it basically in railroad bonds. And they lost $3 million of post-slave money, right? Those dollars translate into today's time as $1.5 billion, right? So the distrust between Black-owned companies and banks, and government, that distrust has kind of always been there. And so when I saw that in order to get access to these funds, it depended on the relationship with the banks, I felt a sense of skepticism, and I knew that it wouldn't go as planned.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that being said, and systematically, there's something wrong with the system. So in your opinion, what can be done systematically in order to make minority and Black-owned businesses more comfortable with the process? Is it a mindset we have to have, or is it a system problem totally, or is it something that Black owners, entrepreneurs can do in order to take advantage of the system?
And I think it's a great question. I think ultimately, well, first we need to define what are systems.
Right.
When we're talking about, and I hear this term all the time, we're talking about systemic racism and systemic oppression. Like we really have to dig into what that means. When we're talking about systems, we're talking about um, the education system,
Hmm.
which are greatly underfunded in traditional Black districts,
Right.
and there's miseducation in education systems, right? We're talking about the housing system, and we're talking about the residual effect of redlining and how, in most cases, the taxes from the property taxes is what funds education, right?
Yep.
So we're talking about discrepancies with housing, that system. We're talking about discrepancies in our healthcare system, right? Why are Black women so much more at risk of losing their lives having babies than anyone
Absolutely.
else, right? Are discrepancies there. And of course, what we're seeing, and I think this leads to some of the civil unrest, we've always seen these huge disparities with our criminal justice system, right?
Right.
So if we talk about the banking system, and I mentioned this a bit earlier, we're talking about capital. And I want to really dig into the term capital. There are many ways that you can discuss capital. You can talk about intellectual capital, which
Yep.
is my ideas and my concepts. You can talk about human capital, right, which is labor. We were human capital for a number of years. Uh, you can talk about social capital. Social capital is my networks, my family, friends, things of that nature. We're not really talking about that. We're talking about financial capital,
Yep.
right? And financial capital, you can break it down a number of ways. We're talking about either debt capital, which is me getting a loan or a line of credit from my bank. We're talking about equity capital, which is you buy ownership in my company in exchange for cash. So I get your money, and you now have a piece of my company.
Right.
And then we're talking about non-dilutive capital, which is money I don't have to pay back. That is like grants, vouchers, credits, things of that nature. Sometimes cities, when they attract companies to come in, they put it in place what they call a pilot, which is a payment in lieu of taxes.
Hmm.
And so the company has a huge capital incentive to come because of that pilot per se. So when we talk about the system of denying us access to capital, we were the capital. We were the human capital. In fact, we were the financial capital, right? So that system is never going to, I'm not going to say never going to change, but the system is working as perfectly as it is supposed to, right? Again, as I said earlier, Black enterprise and Black capitalism is a tough road to hoe. So what do we do about it? Well, one is, as I said, we need more representation.
Yeah.
We need more folks in charge of those systems to make change.
Yeah.
When we think about, let's take Louisville, right?
Hmm.
Louisville has had a population decrease since 2000. In 2000, the population of Louisville was 7,000 people. In 2010, the population was 6,500, and it's estimated that in 2020 that the population will be somewhere under 6,200. That's a 13% decrease in population. However, in 2000, the population of Black folks was 47%.
Hmm.
The population of Black folks in Louisville estimated in 2020 is 60%, right?
Yeah.
So Louisville is a majority Black city, right?
Yeah.
If we were to look at the systems, what would we see? If we were to look at who runs the educational system in Louisville, what would we see? If we were to look at who runs the healthcare system in Louisville, what would we see? if we were to go to any bank in Louisville and talk to a decision maker, uh, what would we see?
Right.
If we were to go to and look at our criminal justice system, what would we see? So one, we have to have greater representation in those systems, right?
Yeah.
Two, we have to have an exposure to more knowledge and more know-how, right? We have to understand the resources, and that is on us, right? It is on us to have the hunger and the thirst to know where resources are, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Oh.
So there are institutions called CDFIs, which stands for Community Development Financial Institution, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many CDFIs are in Louisville? There may be, may not. We don't know, right? I know that there are some in Jackson, but these are institutions that traditionally lend to Black-owned firms. They traditionally lend to women and veteran organizations, any underserved population. They tend to lend to those businesses, and so we have to really understand what's out there. We also have to understand that there are incentives. There are incentives from either the planning district. So, for example, Louisville is represented by the Golden Triangle Planning District. So, the thing is, Golden Triangle Planning and Development District.
Mm-hmm.
They've got incentives. They have incentives. They have access to capital that we may or may not know about. So, it's important that we take it upon ourselves to understand those things and pursue those things. What does the Chamber of Commerce have available? Right. So, I think beyond us having more representation in those systems and beyond us being knowledgeable about them, we do also have to speak up and hold those who are in charge accountable for the current conditions, right? Mm-hmm. Think about Louisville again, for an example. The poverty rate in Louisville is about 33, 34%. So 1 out of 3 people live below the poverty line. Mm-hmm. The poverty in Louisville is, I think it's 48% for Black families. So half the poverty, right? So if we're talking about a declining population, an increasing Black population, and a rising poverty rate, then where is the city going to be in 10 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we don't do things to invest into those systems, then it is not just hurting me and you, it's hurting the city as a whole.
Right, absolutely. And that's one reason I'm doing this master class, because I think it's so important that, number one, we educate ourselves, because
Right.
Coming from the Bible perspective, the Bible says, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. It's not
Absolutely.
It's not truth by itself that makes you free. It's the truth that you know makes you free. And
Absolutely.
I think that's the issue. A lot of times we know the systems are against us. Number one, they were just built that way. Their foundation is that way.
Yeah.
Right, wrong, indifferent, wherever you stand on that. But I think we limit ourselves by not going out and going to finding out some of the programs and some of the things that are available to us to fight the system. I love what you said a while ago about, we need more representation. We need more people that look like us, talk like us, and think like us in the system. I thought that was a great comment.
Yeah, and I think it's also the difference between knowledge. So one, we got to get knowledge, right? And I have this saying about knowledge. We tend to say that knowledge is power, and I kind of disagree with that a bit. I don't think knowledge is power. I think you get the power once you put the will in front of it, the willpower. What am I willing to do?
Right.
So now that I have this knowledge, what am I now willing to do? That willpower. And so once I get the knowledge and I put the will in front of the power, now I become powerful, right? So and it also brings it back to the wisdom part of it, which is
that's what I was going
to
to
taking this knowledge. Yeah, I'm taking this knowledge and I am applying it. So there are conversations that I have with us, and I can have it with me and you and the family because we're all family.
Right.
So when I'm talking to a group of us, I talk a lot about accountability. I talk a lot about responsibility and things that we should do. Um, Now, when I'm talking to the public at large, nah, y'all need to, I'm holding you accountable for
That's,
what y'all have done, right? So
that's
when I'm in an interview, and when I'm writing an article, or if I'm asked a question by a newspaper, nah, you know.
right.
But when it is a group of us, I do tend to talk about, um, what we can do, how we can hold ourselves more accountable.
Oh, that's funny that pre YouTube and Facebook, anybody would tune into my church and my sermons. It was
Yeah,
accountability, right? We need to look at our,
yeah.
but when my messages are going out to the public at large, it is a different message. No, I totally understand that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth is it's a both and, right?
Oh,
So
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, I think there are definitely things that we can work on and improve and prepare ourselves for. Absolutely, and that's a lot of the work that I do is making sure not only am I connecting entrepreneurs to capital in an equitable way,
Right.
and not only am I helping the city of Memphis. Not only am I helping them to think through um, equitable capital channels and how we can ensure that entrepreneurship lift the local economy. Not only am I doing that, but I'm also talking with business owners around here's
Right.
what you need to do um, to be ready, to be prepared,
Yeah.
um, to have a greater chance of accessing this capital.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Man, you said some great stuff. I've been hoping, that we can prosper in the pandemic. That in spite of all the things going on in social injustice, that we still can move forward. What opportunities are out there right now for somebody who wants to start a business? Somebody who's saying, you know, this may not be a good time, especially in the pandemic, to start a business, but I got that willpower to go. What's your
Yeah.
advice on that?
One thing about a storm is that it washes everything clean, right?
Yeah.
And so in pandemics, which we don't see a lot of them, but in economic downturns, we see the greatest spike in entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Yeah.
The essence of entrepreneurship is identifying a problem and providing a solution for it. That is the um, foundational principle of entrepreneurship. Now you got to have all the resources in place to make sure that that endeavor thrives. But what the pandemic has shown us is that we do have some gaps. We have gaps in technology. We have gaps in access to food. We have gaps, and so there are a number of things that we've identified as problems. And so, what I would say, it is a perfect time to start your business. It's a perfect time to really open your ears and open your eyes, and open your heart, and see what are some problems that are existing that we can create and solve for.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, this one question that's I have down that I want to get to, and then we're gonna wrap it up. Given the momentum of the Black Lives Matter movement, what can an individual do in their local communities to kind of transfer, in your opinion, that momentum to the business sector? What do you see as far as uh, us kind of taking that same zeal and actually putting it to work for us on an economic basis?
Mm. That's a good question. I'm reading a couple of books by Sean Rochester
Yeah.
out of um, out of Connecticut, I think. In fact, his first book. This is his first book right here. It's called CPR for the Soul. He actually uses biblical principles and scripture as to how we um, attain wealth that passes on from generation to generation, right?
Yep.
And so, one of the things that Sean Rochester talks about is this concept of PhD, right? And so, what is PhD? So the P stands for purchase. So we got this momentum, what can black folks do? Buy black, purchase black, right? Um, and then that support doesn't end with just the black consumer. That responsibility also lands on the black business owner, right? Who are you ordering your paper from and your ink? Who are you ordering your uniforms from? Who are you ordering your supplies from?
Right.
You should be buying black as well, right? So when we think about supply chain purchasing, if we're really talking about empowering the black dollar again, we have to start by purchasing black. The second thing is the H in PhD is hire. For those of us that own companies, attempt to hire black folks and pay them a livable wage, right? And I also have the same message when non-black allies want to know, hey, what can we do to help? I give them the same thing. Buy from black folks. If you own a company, buy your stuff from black folks. And hire black folks, right? Then the D in the PhD is deposit, and that's where it gets kind of tough. It is deposit your money in black banks or banks that have been intentional to deploy capital into underserved communities, and that's where it gets tough. If I were to go to Winston County, Tibiaha County, Knoxville County, and ask, hey, where is a black bank? We wouldn't be able to identify one, right? Moreover, and this goes back to what we just talked about, if I were to go to a lot of those same counties and ask, which bank has been intentional and progressive to lend money into underserved communities, we probably wouldn't have a great deal of answers there either. And when we're talking about deploying capital, we're not just talking about they're making business loans, which they could be, but what about access to housing? So, how does their ratios look with lending to black homeowners, right? Things of that nature.
Yeah.
So, how do we galvanize the movement spurred by Black Lives Matter, and how does it translate into enterprise? I think we have to be intentional to make sure that as a people we support black-owned businesses, and that black-owned businesses implement purchasing black in the supply chain, hiring black folks, and we try to deposit our money in institutions that traditionally deploy money into the community.
Yeah. Two more questions for you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you go. One, what do you see as the church's role in helping to promote black-owned businesses, minority businesses in general, being that there's so much influence, right, with pastors, there's so much influence in the church. What advice would you give pastors or the church world as a whole in order to help each other in this process? You know what I mean?
So I would, you and I are not just cousins, but you're a brother to me, and so I would have this conversation with you, but I would also have it with my bishop, right? I think that the greatest collection of resources that we have are anchored in the churches in the black community.
Right.
I give you a couple things on that. What entrepreneurs need, one of the things entrepreneurs need is space.
Yeah.
The movement also needs space. We need space to create. We need space to have meetings. We need space to galvanize and be able to showcase our products and services. In our community, the place with the most space are the churches.
Right.
We have sanctuaries. We have offices. We have in some churches we have commercial kitchens, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example of that. One of my favorite entrepreneurs, and I work with entrepreneurs across the city and all across Mississippi, actually. But one of my favorite entrepreneurs is actually my cousin, Muffin, right? So Muffin has the company Dip with Love, right?
Member of my church.
There you go. There you go. So, and I haven't had a conversation with her, but looking at Muffin's products and services, right? I think she's brilliant, and I love the creativity in which she comes up with these products, right? So, if I were the advisor, we would have two kind of main fronts. One, we would spur online sales, and we would figure out how can we mass produce your top 3 items, get those things online, and have sales in Delaware and Texas and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
The second thing it will be the retail aspect of it. I'm sorry, the wholesale aspect, and I would try and get 10 stores to carry 2 or 3 products. Well, for Muffin to do that, she needs access to equipment and she needs space, right? So she needs a commercial kitchen that she can mass produce these products. She needs space that she can keep the equipment and things of that nature, right? She needs space that 2 or 3 or 4 people, as she begins to grow and hire folks, 2 or 3 or 4 people can work and have their hands in a kitchen. So one of the things that a church could do is provide access to space, right? So that's resource number 1. Resource number 2 is, I think, the people itself. Where else can I go in a community and have the ears and the hearts of 25, 50, 100, 500 Black people at one time?
Right.
Only place I can find that is 11 o'clock on the church, right? And the beauty of that is I can find that not only in Center Ridge, I can find it on East Side. There's a church on West Side, a church in Greenbrier, New Zion, Antioch. You know what I'm saying? So regardless of where we are, I have access to people. And so if I am trying to galvanize a movement, whether that movement is entrepreneurial or whether that movement is combating social injustice, that is the greatest collection of people I can find is that in a church on Sunday at 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
I would say that there are 2 more resources. One is the leadership. I think that what I mean by leadership is if we're trying to have true change and we're trying to combat social injustices, we will likely need to tap into allies, right?
Mm-hmm.
The pastor of Second Baptist Church is more likely to have an open-ended conversation with you than they are with me, right? So we do need the advocacy. And that also translates into enterprise, that if we are trying to spur enterprise, we need the advocacy of our most prominent leaders in our community to speak out and speak up for us.
Yeah.
And the last thing, I left it last, but entrepreneurs need access to capital, right?
Yeah.
And so when we really break it down and think about it, the only institution that has been funded by us is the churches. Right? And so I think not only having sessions like this, but having pitch competitions, right? You pitch your idea, you get access to $1,000 check. Things like that, I think could, and then the money doesn't have to always come from the church, right? You have a pitch competition, you raise the offering, boom, right? That entrepreneur gets $400 to improve their website to do online sales, things like that. Right? So I think that the church has the space. I think that the church has the number of people. I think that the church has the leadership and advocacy ability. And I also think that the church has access to deploy capital in a way in our community that we don't really have any other comparables to.
Yeah. So I'm gonna steal that pitch idea thing from you, right?
Do it, man. I think it'd be a great idea.
I think it will be, and I'm gonna get you to kind of implement that too. So I think that's a wonderful thing, man.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use those ideas kind of galvanize our community and our church to do some things. We've tried so many things. I won't get into it here. We did Bust a
Yeah,
Move to support Black-owned businesses every
yeah,
month. We have to, as a Black community, also support our own more than anything.
absolutely.
We found so much difficulty with our own folks and Bust a Move, what the church would give to Black-owned businesses, but also have our members try to go and support their businesses for that month. And that was man, fighting tooth and nail. You know what I mean? Just for people to do that.
Yeah,
That's a whole nother
and
conversation.
yeah, and again, when I have conversations with folks, we got to hold each other accountable for that. You know what
Right.
I mean? So we have to be honest and upfront and talk about why that's the case.
Yeah.
And I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but we have to dig into why does it make me feel a certain way when I see this business thriving, right?
Mhm.
We have to tap into those things and have that conversation
Right.
um,
Right.
to hold ourselves accountable for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Last question, man. What's on your mind? What's on your heart? And what are you doing right now as far as uh, on an everyday basis? Tell us a little bit about your job and you personally, and just share what's on your heart right now with pandemic, with social injustice, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, man. So I serve as the capital executive in residence, and basically what that means is um, I try and connect entrepreneurs across industries, across communities, to capital in an equitable way. And what I mean by equitable is we all have access to it, right?
Right.
And um, beyond that, it's also trying to identify gaps in our ecosystem, our entrepreneur ecosystem,
Hmm.
and lending a voice to that.
Yeah.
So if I see that, look, um, I don't think micro businesses have equal access to capital, then I say that and I try and help create that for the city.
Hmm.
If I say, look, we need more grant money for Black folks in the city, then I say that and I try and help raise money for it and try and help galvanize that.
Right.
So I'm focused on that. I also have an interest on seeing um, more Black founders in with tech-based companies and also more Black investors in tech. I think
Yeah.
the opportunity to create wealth in that space, typically like agriculture technology, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's the number two industry on Silicon Valley right now, and so we have an opportunity to really tap into that space and make some things happen. So I'm focused on that right now. In terms of the pandemic, um, part of my role has been to administer some of these small micro grants. So we've been able to help um, 38 businesses in the city. Um, 32 of those businesses were Black-owned businesses, right? So that's why representation
Right.
matters
Right.
in that regard. So in terms of professionally, that's what I'm working on. Personally, trying to raise these kids, man. Trying to have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, my 2-year-old. So it's busy times and
Oh yeah, absolutely.
trying to raise the kids, make sure the wife's happy,
Yeah.
uh,
I take
things
it.
of that nature.
I take it you're still in the bed like mine, so you can have a quiet time.
Man, so they're actually up. They're eating breakfast right now, and so I
Yours, they way more quiet than mine.
man, I don't know, man. They see me doing this every day, and so they get flustered enough to know that they're supposed to
Okay.
be quiet. And
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
going on? Yeah. So from a personal standpoint, that's it, and just making sure. I wrote another article. I don't know if you saw it or not, but it was entitled "Black Men in Finance." And
Right.
one of the things that I said there was that when I was at the bank, I didn't always feel that I could use my voice to speak up and things of that nature.
Right. Right.
So you don't want to. I didn't want to have the stigma of being the angry Black guy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's also both external and internal pressure to kind of conform, right?
Right. Oh,
And so, yeah. And so now I have the luxury and the freedom, and it's really a blessing that when I see an injustice, whether it be social, financial, whatever, I can speak out to that, and I can try and help create ways to solve for that. And I don't have to conform, or I don't have to. When I walk in a room or I get on a call, I talk just like this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, yeah, I try and have good diction and try to enunciate words, but I talk just like this. And I think now more than ever, I think it's more important that I do use whatever little small platform I have to try and liberate the people.
Yeah, man, it's like I told you on the email in the prep for this thing. I think you have a voice that should be spread out to the nations, that people should hear. What you say carries weight, and I honor that gift, and you always have. Couldn't stand you when we were little in your Easter speeches.
Hey man, we had some good times after church. And it'd be me, you, Pierre, Cub, Gauss, Puda. You know what I'm saying? We had some good times.
We all didn't like the fact that we had 2 sentence Easter speeches and you had 4 paragraphs. But you know, we'll.
Man, but one, who gave me the speech? Miss Kara Jean gave me the speech, man. Miss Kara Jean give me a speech like this. I'm like, man, Lord have mercy. Give me the street.
My mama saw the gift in you. So, man, I appreciate your time. I appreciate what you're doing in the community, man. And I thank you for taking the time to do our masterclass. We're going to have you again sometime in the near future, because I want to continue to do these because, like I said, everything that you said, it just resonates in the Black community, and we all should take heed, man. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Absolutely, man. I would also encourage y'all to again check out these 2 books. They're both by Sean Rochester. One is CPR for the Soul. It really digs into how we can create wealth from a biblical standpoint. And then the other one is The Black Tax.
Black Tax.
It is an eye-opening book, eye-opening read, again by Sean Rochester. This book dives into the cost of being Black in America. The interest rates are always higher for us on a number of things. So I won't give it away, but I will tell you to check out those 2 books, and I'd like to have some conversation with you around it when you get a chance.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll put some links to the book on the screen as well, and also to the articles that you wrote. Man, again, I appreciate it. We're gonna definitely do it again.
Awesome, man. Thanks, cuz.
All right, man. You take care, man. I appreciate you.
All right. Yes, sir.